Well, good evening. I encourage you to find a soft drink and grab a plate of hummus and then find your chair. We're getting started almost right on time here. I'm Tim Christ, president of the Newark History Society, and I'm pleased to welcome you here tonight. As many of you know, a group of us started the Newark History Society about 13 years ago, and we've been delighted with how interested people are in Newark's history and how keen they are to take part in civic occasions like this. And coming together to reflect on Newark's history and having the conversation is indeed part of the civic fabric of Newark now. We're especially pleased to be here at NJPAC tonight, hosted by the Women's Association of NJPAC and by John Schreiber, the director. John is unable to join us tonight, but he wanted to send his greetings and encourage you to return not only for our future programs here, but of course for the many concerts and recitals that take place here so often. John has just done a tremendous job making NJPAC the center of everything that goes on in Newark and much of the metropolitan area. We have scheduled 3 Newark History Society programs here in the spring. They're in NJPAC's program. We put a sheet on the desk outside, and there are a couple on the tables back there listing all the upcoming programs. But if you want to be notified directly, take one of these cards that are scattered around on the chairs, and we'll be glad to send you email notices for our programs. That said, our next Newark History Society program will take place at the New Jersey Historical Society, just across the street, on Monday, November 16th. And Guy Sterling, who's sitting here in the first row, has prepared a talk about Jerome Kern and Ralph Ranger and music theater in early 20th century Newark. It should be a lot of fun. Again, that's on Monday, November 16th. Guy has also told me about, and he handed out some of these flyers, and you'll want to track these as well. He's going to hold a number of conversations with Newarkers. And apparently January 19th is the first one, and he's invited Dr. Victor Parsonet and Donald Karp, well known to almost everyone in this room, to join him that night for a conversation about their careers and about Newark. Before we start our program, I want to take a moment to note Bob Curvin's death last month. Bob was one of the giants of Newark, and we benefited greatly from his advice since he was a member of the executive committee of the Newark History Society. He helped us plan tonight's program. We were honored to plan the launch of his book, Inside Newark, here at NJPAC just about 15 months ago. We're pleased that Pat Curvin is with us here tonight, but I would invite you to take a moment of silence to recall Bob and all that he did for the city of Newark. Thank you. Now it's time for our program. And one of the things that I value most about the Newark History Society is getting to know Walt Chambers, who's moderating our program tonight. As most of you know, Walt is a native Newarker, a graduate of Lincoln University, where he's been a long-time trustee of that college. I just learned tonight he was on the trustees of the College of New Jersey for a number of years and chaired that board for 3 years. Back in the 1950s, when you were a young man, younger man, he was named to the mayor's commission on intergroup relations, which was really one of the important initiatives of the 1950s. Then in the 1960s, he became the first black executive of a Newark corporation, New Jersey Bell. And again, when we started planning this, Walt said, well, I was part of the planning committee for the 1966 celebration. And he said, well, that's relevant. So we invited him to moderate tonight's program, and we're honored to have him and all of our panelists here. Walt?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Tim, and I do feel young. We are here to commemorate the birthdays of the city of Newark, past and present. This is surely appropriate in view of the mission of the Newark History Society, as you heard Tim describe. Newark, as New Jersey's largest city, certainly has a reputation for exciting and lavish parties to recognize its milestones. These celebrations were and still are community-centered. This program tonight will take us back over the past 100 years with focus on 1916 and 1966 and a glimpse of the 350th coming up next year, 2016. Our story will be presented by a distinguished panel who are prepared to cover Newark's celebrations. The agenda will proceed with their talks, beginning with 1916 and conclude with and on up to, of course, 2016. And then we will conclude with a brief question and answer period. For those of you who know me from programs past, you know that the operative word is brief and to the point. So now let's meet our panel. First, we have Dr. Martin V. Minner. Marty has affectionate ties to two communities, Greater Newark, New Jersey, and Bloomington, Indiana. Marty's grandparents came from Newark's Ironbound section and from Beacon Street, a now extinct street that ran off South Orange Avenue. Marty grew up in East Orange and Morris County. He received his bachelor's degree in communication from Seton Hall, and Marty then received his PhD in history from Indiana University. With support from the New Jersey Historical Commission, he wrote his doctoral dissertation on public memory in Progressive Era Newark. After completing his doctorate, Marty decided to make Bloomington his home. His interests there include historic theaters and the history of Indiana limestone. He has his own business which develops books and learning media. Marty enjoys helping people teach, learn, and engage with their communities. We are proud that he was able, his parents still live in New Jersey in Cedar Knolls, and they are here tonight, so he has to do well. Next, we have Jeffrey V. Moy. As archivist of the Newark Museum, Jeff Moy created a formal records program for this groundbreaking institution and worked over a period of 12 years to make its history available to both scholars and members of the public. A native of Los Angeles, Jeff developed an early interest in history and earned his bachelor's in American Studies from, I think it's Occidental, is that right? You're okay. Close. College, a master's in United States history from Rutgers, and a certificate in archival management and historical society administration from New York University. After Hurricane Sandy, He supervised the treatment of damaged photographs, artifacts, and documents at the National Guard and Militia Museum of New Jersey. Jeff is currently the archivist of the Morristown and Morris Township Libraries North Jersey History and Genealogy Center, where he oversees the preservation, organization, and description of historical material dating from the colonial era to the present. And Jeff will speak on Newark birthday in 1966. The third panelist at the end is Dr. John W. Johnson, Jr. John is a fellow at the Clement A. Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience. He received his PhD from Rutgers Newark in American Studies in just last year, in 2014. His doctoral dissertation surveys the growth and development of the storied Weequahic section of Newark, charting its transition from a predominantly Jewish to a majority African-American neighborhood. A seasoned educator, Dr. Johnson has taught high school as well as undergraduate students. He has served as a middle school administrator and higher education program coordinator and resident counselor. John is a proud alum of St. Benedict's Prep School here in Newark. As part of his fellowship, Dr. Johnson serves as the executive director of Newark 350, the organization charged with the Newark Celebration 2016. And he will, of course, give us a preview of some of their plans to date. We just learned that John is really into this thing about celebration, because as some of you know, on Saturday, they had a kickoff here in Newark, and he got so carried away until at a party that evening, he became engaged. So, we will start with 1916, Marty Minner.
People who study history sometimes stumble onto their research topic in unexpected ways. I discovered the 1916 celebration while doing research on Newark's Polish community. It was family history research that turned into a graduate school project. I learned about the Poles' veneration of the icon of Our Lady of Częstochowa, the formation of St. Stanislaus and St. Casimir's parishes in Newark, that St. Casimir's on the right when it was under construction, and then later after it was complete. I found references that in 1916, some of Newark's Poles took part in a city historical pageant. I looked into the pageant further. The Poles part of the pageant made sense to me because they reenacted scenes from Polish history. But the rest of the pageant seemed strange and foreign. It was filled with allegorical figures that I didn't understand. In time, I made sense of those allegorical figures, and I've been studying the 1916 celebration ever since. It tells us a lot about how we portray the past, how we use the past for various purposes in the present, and how we imagine the future. It turns out that my path to learning about the 1916 celebration by way of Polish history was a good one, because so much of the celebration was about Newark's ethnic groups and their relationship to the broader community. A study in the early 1910s produced this map of what the researchers called nationalities. Notice the patchwork of groups: Germans, Jews, Italians, Irish, Slavs, blacks, Greeks, and Chinese. At that point, 2/3 of the city's population was either first or second generation foreign born. That sets up an important part of the historical context for the 1916 celebration. To more fully understand the context of the celebration, add in these factors: social reform, conflict between labor and capital, the campaign for women's suffrage, middle-class migration to the suburbs, and competition with New York City for metropolitan dominance. Then add the war that was going on in Europe, and the desire for civic cohesiveness takes on special importance. Like so many things, the 1916 celebration began with a committee. The chairman was former Governor Franklin Murphy, owner of the Murphy Varnish Company. The committee included quite a few members of German or Irish ancestry, some Jewish members, 2 Italians, 1 black man, and 1 Pole. The committee was called the Committee of 100. It consisted of 96 men and 4 women. Professor Ezra Shales, in his book about Newark during this period, tells us about women's struggle to create a place for themselves in public life. A second celebration committee consisting of women was formed later, called the Committee of 50. The Committee of 100 envisioned a broad celebration encompassing many media and civic events. The celebration had 3 main audiences: Newark residents, suburbanites, and business people outside Newark. Why suburbanites? They were part of the territory that Newark's boosters considered Greater Newark. The celebration adopted the Puritan founder as a symbol of civic unity for the diverse community of Newark. The winning entry in a poster contest was this depiction of the founder's landing in 1666. Founder Robert Treat is in the foreground directing the landing. But the public disagreed with the judges. They chose the poster on the right, showing an allegorical figure of the city with symbols of industry, commerce, and education. The committee printed the Treat poster on millions of poster stamps. They were like Christmas seals. They were gummed, and you could stick them on the back of an envelope. Prudential gave the poster stamps to its agents to use on outgoing mail as a publicity device for the city. And the U.S. Post Office created a special anniversary cancellation for mail sent from Newark. The Treat image appeared on all sorts of badges and buttons. Many were made by the Whitehead and Hogue Company, a Newark manufacturer, so that you could display a civic symbol and also show off a local product. The committee licensed the Treat image for every imaginable product. In the lower left-hand corner, that's a genuine Robert Treat handkerchief. The dignified founder appeared on ashtrays, cigarette cases, and manicure files. The department stores enthusiastically supported the celebration. Bamberger's hung historical murals over its display windows. The store offered their own celebration china and souvenir spoons, all featuring the official image of Robert Treat. He showed up everywhere. The Newark News modified the poster for its annual baseball booklet. I like the way the artist converted the Puritans' walking stick into a baseball bat. The celebration had its own color scheme, orange and black. Why would Newark choose orange and black as its colors? It was an astute choice. At one level, orange may be a reference to the nearby towns that we know as the Oranges, part of the original territory settled by the Puritans, and part of what Newark's boosters were calling Greater Newark. Orange and black are also the colors of Princeton University. Why would Newark choose the colors of Princeton? Well, Princeton had several connections for the Newark celebration. Franklin Murphy, the celebration chairman, happened to be a Princeton graduate. President Woodrow Wilson was former governor of New Jersey and former president of Princeton. And the colors had a historical connection. The school that we know as Princeton was located in Newark for 9 years in the 18th century, then called the College of New Jersey. So the orange and black alluded to Newark's historical claim on Princeton as its own and they provided a colorful symbol of civic identity. The orange and black formed the backdrop for many parades during the celebration. There's the Puritan founder marching on Broad Street. A crowd of 82,000 reportedly attended the May 1st parade. That's about 1/5 of the city's population. A few weeks later, in a schools parade, 15,000 students from the city's schools marched. The parade was so long that it took 3.5 hours to pass the reviewing stand. When we look at black and white photographs of the anniversary parades, the red, white, and blue American flags are easy to pick out. But if you look closely, you can find the orange and black color scheme all along the parade route. Zoom in on the upper corner of the Broad Street photo that we just looked at. You'll see the American flags at the top and bottom. In between is huge orange and black bunting in the officially prescribed proportion of 2 parts orange to 1 part black. The committee hired sculptor Gutzen Borglum. Borglum had an established relationship with Newark. A few years earlier, he created the very popular Abraham Lincoln sculpture in front of the Essex County Courthouse. For the 1916 celebration, Borglum created this piece as a traffic island in Washington Street near the public library. He titled it Indian and Puritan. The carved figures at the base are historical references, but Borglum and the committee wanted the top of the sculpture to evoke the natural beauty of the Newark marshes. He took inspiration from the marshmallow plant. Borglum meant for the lamp globes and metal lamp supports to look like the blossoms and fronds of the marshmallow plant. So imagine those blossoms on that sculpture. That's what Borglum had in mind. He specified 2 tones of pink for the globes. Some were to be a light apple blossom pink and some a deep apple blossom pink. But the manufacturers had trouble producing what Borglum wanted, and today we end up with plain white round globes instead of the pink blossoms. Celebration had its own magazine. The Newarker covered celebration events in great detail. However, the Newarker steered off course in one of its very few references to the city's black population. This incident was first written about by the late Clement Price some years ago. Be warned that the next image contains an offensive reference. The Celebration magazine published this announcement regarding a Jubilee chorus. I'm quoting from the Newarker for January 1916. There are a goodly number of worthy colored folk in Newark. They probably wish to participate in our celebration. The article mentions the Jubilee chorus and goes on, I'm quoting, with such a mellifluous lot of musical colored folk and a carload of watermelons, the firmament over Newark will be crowded with angels on the nights when they vocally jubilate. So they not only used a racial stereotype, but they tried to render the word watermelons in dialect. One member of the celebration committee took exception to the announcement. William H. Maxwell was born in Tennessee, came to Newark with his family in 1902 by way of Washington. He worked as a factory timekeeper and a jewelry maker. He was active in progressive Republican politics. When the announcement about the Jubilee Chorus appeared in the Newarker, Maxwell resigned from the celebration committee in protest. He wrote that by referring to the anniversary as our celebration, the organizers put the city's black population, in his words, entirely on the outside, begging to get in. He charged that the article just put into print what many Newarkers already thought. The incident is important because it reveals the racial divide that existed in many American cities even before the U.S. entry into the war, and even in a celebration that was ostensibly about civic unity. Maxwell went on to become Sunday editor of the Newark Ledger, and we have his photo thanks to the New Jersey Historical Society. All of these issues, commemorating the past, envisioning the future, and negotiating the role of various groups within the broader community, came together in Newark's historical pageant. Historical pageantry was at the peak of its popularity in the months leading up to Newark's 1916 celebration. The largest historical pageant was in St. Louis in 1914, and communities all over the United States joined in the trend. In Newark, Francis Hayes promoted the idea of a historical pageant. Hayes was president of the Contemporary, a prominent women's organization. Here's Francis Hayes in pageant costume, dressed as the spirit of Newark. Hayes wrote, "Newark is a wealthy industrial city. Much material prosperity, but no soul yet." She wrote that a pageant could be a stimulus to civic pride, something impressive, artistic, truly beautiful, a fitting expression of the multiform life of a great city. The committee hired Thomas Wood Stevens to write and direct the Newark pageant. Stevens was best known for his work on the huge pageant in St. Louis. He believed history in books was losing its significance for the younger generation, which still sounds familiar. He felt that enacting a community's history on stage made the past come alive in people's imagination. He designed this outdoor amphitheater in Wequahic Park. Workers dug the lagoon to his specifications. They filled it with water from the city water main, and they added blue dye so that at night under the stage lights, that shallow moat would look like a deep water channel, like Port Newark. Stevens began a citywide casting effort. A descendant of Robert Treat was chosen to play the founder. When he had his photograph taken, he mimicked the pose from the celebration poster. Organizations throughout the city provided members to play groups in various historical scenes. So one organization played the Puritans, one played the colonial troops, or the Redcoats, or the townspeople. It was a huge volunteer effort. Volunteers handled set construction, costume making, publicity, and anything else that needed to be done. A home was turned over to the pageant committee to be used as a pageant house. The volunteer work was definitely segregated along gender lines. Women turned the house into a studio where they created hundreds of specialized costumes. Any costume that couldn't be rented had to be made by hand. They did all the dyeing, cutting, sewing, and trimming. But meanwhile, other organizations were doing other tasks. The Boy Scouts collected brush to build a foliage screen behind the stage. It was a screen built out of brush to hide the backstage activities from the audience. Now, the pageant was supposed to depict the city's many cultural groups. But Hayes wrote to Stevens to say that the local casting committee was drawing actors from only 2 or 3 of the groups. She wrote to Stevens, "The pageant organization is very disappointing. I'm wondering with a forlorn sort of hope if you might not still inject a little bit more of the democratic spirit into it." But Stevens thought the same way. He eventually cast many groups in the pageant. Catherine M. Lynch was a member of the Women's Celebration Committee. 2 weeks before opening night, the casting chairman wrote this hurried note, apparently to Lynch. I'm quoting from his letter using his words. "Mr. Stevens tells me that he would like a group of colored people for the third movement, about 20 in all, probably 10 each in 2 scenes. This movement is rehearsed tonight with as many of the group leaders as we can get." He invited her to attend rehearsal that same evening. It appears that the black actors did take part in the pageant, although only in group scenes. Let's go to the pageant together. It's an evening in late May 1916. You're in Wequahic Park. You've probably arrived by streetcar. Extra streetcars are running tonight to handle the extra pageant traffic. It's getting dark out. Under the stage lights, mist rises from the stage. In a brief prologue, you see the Lenape, the original people of the Newark area, as interpreted by Stevens. The Lenape encounter the English, the French, and the Dutch. The first movement is about the Puritans. You see them purchase the land from the Lenape. They set up their government. They lay out a plan for the town. They say a plan with broad streets, which is a reference to the colonial origins of today's Broad Street. The second movement portrays later colonial history and the American Revolution. You see 700 actors playing the part of colonial and British troops. In the lower photo, the townspeople of Newark welcome General Washington and his troops to Newark. They even have a live horse on stage. The third movement is packed with civic-minded events from the 19th century. When General Lafayette visited Newark in 1824, he was greeted by 13 girls dressed in white who symbolized the original 13 states. Now the pageant reenacts that visit, and these 13 girls get to greet General Lafayette all over again. After intermission, the final movement is a kind of performance you've probably never seen before. It isn't historical, it's allegorical. It consists of symbolic figures enacting a civic narrative. First, nature spirits dance on stage. There are many of them, these were just a few. In the upper left, those are irises dressed in green and purple. That's an oak leaf, he's one of the tree spirits. And a bluebird, one of many different kinds of birds that populated the scene. The colorful costumes, all made by the volunteers at the pageant house. Next, the spirit of Newark enters with her court. This is the actual stage in Weequahic Park. These are daylight photos, and remember that the pageant is being performed at night under stage lights. The spirit of Newark is dressed in royal purple. She's carried in by her attendants. The dark figure at the right is the Puritan spirit. The figures in her court are the civic virtues. On the left is church. In the middle is education, symbolically carrying books. The figure on the right is civic beauty. Some of the other civic virtues in her court are law and invention. Then the civic vices come on stage. A group of warriors represent strife. The group at the right is folly. They do a dance of ignorance. Another figure, an important one in the story, represents greed. And when you have civic virtues and civic vices on stage at the same time, you can probably guess what happens next. A battle breaks out between the civic virtues and the civic vices. This is a member of the strife group, and law on the right defending the city. So it's law defending the city against strife. For the moment, the vices win. The figure of greed steals Newark's jewels and runs off with them. The spirit of Newark is left alone on stage. Her jewels have been stolen. Her purple robes are gone. She's wrapped in gray. She's bound, and she can't speak. It's a symbolic ravishing of the feminine spirit of the city. Now comes the key moral turning point. The Puritan spirit, seeing what's happened to his city, has a change of heart. He decides to embrace new ways. He decides to welcome newcomers to the city. But first, the industries come on stage. On the left is Jewels and Adornments. She represents the city's jewelry manufacturing and button-making industries. On the right, in the colorful peacock costume, is Paints and Colors. Each of Newark's main industries has a group of dancers in distinctive costumes. Now the nations arrive, and finally my Polish group comes back into the picture. The Polish herald greets Newark. He says the Poles carry to Newark their dream of freedom. And the Greeks, Irish, and Slovaks arrive. The Germans avoid any reference to current events in Europe. They depict German writers and composers. The French portray inventors, and that's Joan of Arc at the far left. Scottish, Ruthenian, and Lithuanian groups all act out their history. And then Italians in the bottom photo do a presentation based on Dante. Now that the Puritan spirit has chosen tolerance, the immigrants and industries stand alongside of the spirit of Newark in an idealized expression of labor harmony. The city is back in her purple robes, and she can speak. She calls this her finest hour. She looks back in pride. She looks forward with high heart. Then all of the groups return to the stage for this final dance. All of the nations, industries, nature spirits, and civic virtues, all in one dance, one blend of movement and coordinated color. A vision of hopes and dreams for the future city. Thank you.
Jeff Moy, 1966.
Good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Newark's 300th anniversary is intriguing because it gave residents a chance to look back at the city's long history, as well as look ahead to a possible future during a time of great social and economic change. Like the 250th, an upswell in civic pride and engagement built throughout the community in the years before and after the 300th. Of course, the celebratory mood of '66 was soon overshadowed by the civil disturbances of 1967. Given this historic dichotomy, I want to take a moment to consider the question, why is it that we choose to commemorate our history? In all societies, it is our memory that binds us to our closest friends, family, and neighbors, and to each other, culturally, spiritually, and through our shared heritage and traditions, in an unbroken line that reaches back to our earliest ancestors and enjoins our experiences with those of our descendants. Historian Jonathan Bodnar asserts that commemorative events can serve to calm anxiety about change or political events, eliminate indifference towards official concerns, promote exemplary patterns of citizen behavior, and stress duties over rights. And in order to better understand what happened in 1966, I would like to take a look at how the city had changed since 1916. We will then look at how residents planned a year of parades, exhibits, and performances to celebrate the 300th anniversary, and how city leaders sought to anticipate changing social and economic forces and to create a vision of the future. By 1910, Newark had attained the apex of its industrial growth. Manufacturing began a slow decline in the 20s until the Great Depression dealt a crippling blow to the industrial sector. However, some factory labor shifted over the years to areas such as electrical engineering and chemical manufacturing, as well as the growth of white-collar work in finance and insurance. Business leaders realized that the city was in a period of transition and encouraged massive investment in infrastructure, cultural resources, and local construction. They argued that improvements to public utilities and services, coupled with corporate investment, would invigorate the business and residential tax base. War production briefly resuscitated local industry throughout the 1940s, but as World War II drew to a close, Newark once again found itself reevaluating its identity as an industrial hub in a post-industrial world. Thus, in 1966, the city was experiencing significant economic, social, and cultural changes that were decades in the making. Governance and infrastructure were heavily invested in industrial production, commerce, and banking in an effort to counteract the massive trend of post-war suburbanization. A 1944 report commissioned by City Hall hinted at the wider repercussions of the economic outlook. In 1909, Newark produced 1/4, fully 25% of all wages in New Jersey, and employed 20% of the state's residents. However, by 1939, it generated only 10% of the state's wages and employed a mere 11% of the population. Simultaneously, upper-class residency had declined from 71% in 1920 to 14% by 1941. Continuing a trend that began prior to World War II, factory and labor positions, traditionally an opening to the middle class for new residents, were also dispersing. And while Newark successfully created a post-war construction boom, of the 1,787 union apprentices in 1967, only 150 were racial minorities. When asked how less than 1% of apprentices were either African American or Latino, although they constituted more than half of the city's population, New Jersey Industrial Union Council President Joel Jacobson blamed, quote, a combination of prejudice, past practices, inertia, and the inability to meet a problem where there is a desire to do so. Considering the many challenges faced by the city in '66, the tercentenary was an opportunity to not just build renewed civic pride, it was also a chance to create a unified vision of community and urban cohesion. As 1966 approached, civic leaders planned a flurry of commemorative parades, publications, special events, and exhibits. In order to coordinate these events, the Newark 300th Anniversary Corporation, or NTAC, formed on September 15, 1965. Its 33 members represented government, business, and labor leaders, and the corporation's board of trustees met on a monthly basis under the guidance of a president and executive chairman. And you may recognize Charles Cummings there on the right, touring the basement and former wine cellar, although they didn't find anything to drink at the time. In order to better conduct their work, Continental Insurance Company purchased for NTAC a vacant home at 2 Park Place, which was then renovated and furnished by several department stores, the New Jersey Historical Society, and the Newark Museum. Among the goals set during the corporation's first meeting were to promote among those who live in Newark, to promote those among who live in Newark, particularly the youth of the city, a greater awareness of the city's resources and traditions, to encourage a greater appreciation of the city's assets among those who work in Newark but live elsewhere, to educate the general public on Newark's economic and cultural importance to the entire northern New Jersey area, to promote the creation of new cultural institutions and activities that will enrich the lives of those who live in the region, and most importantly, to instill in all who live or work here a deep sense of pride in Newark. In the lead up to the anniversary, the board stressed its first 2 goals. It commissioned the design of a 300th anniversary shoulder patch featuring a logo with the words Pride in Newark that was to be worn by police, fire, city employees, as well as the staffs of Ballantyne & Sons, the Robert Treat Hotel, Colonnade Park Apartments, Continental Insurance, and Military Park Garage. In a similar vein, NTAC created a commemorative postage plate for local businesses, organizations, and offices. The promotion committee merchandised the anniversary logo on keychains, napkins, hats, and pencils. By mid-January, over 7,000 patches have been distributed, orders for 150 postage plates taken, and 50,000 bumper stickers have been passed out. The ubiquitous insignia also appeared on official 300th anniversary flags, which were purchased and proudly displayed by area businesses and families. Not to be left out, a flag desk set was offered for the office-bound businessmen. And finally, in May of 1966, Richard Wiss, president of J. Wiss & Sons, presented the Pride of Newark Rose to Mayor Adonizio at a special ceremony. Developed by famous hybridizer Dr. Dennison Morey, the rose was designed to be, quote, well-suited to city planting because of its ability to thrive under urban conditions. The mayor immediately ordered the 3-foot rose bushes with shell pink blossoms diffused with white planted throughout the city. Even as officials planned the details of the elaborate Founders Day parade, they coordinated a series of cultural events and historical tours. The Metropolitan Opera offered 8 performances in Symphony Hall, including Carmen, Madame Butterfly, and Susanna. An international film festival was scheduled for the fall season, and beginning in January of 1966, the Newark Board of Education sponsored a series of radio programs on topics ranging from Newark's original Native American residents to city governance, commerce, transportation, and fire and police protection. Members of the Senior High Fellowship, dressed in Puritan costumes, led tours of the newly renovated First Presbyterian Church on Broad Street, where visitors examined the church's original royal charter, toured the restored sanctuary, and as well as family histories of parishioners dating back 3 centuries. A number of activities sought to engage the city's growing African American population. Famed Broadway director Frank Turok produced a stage production of Guys and Dolls featuring an all-black cast. Furthermore, the Negro Historical Society sponsored a parade honoring Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and Wampanoag descent, who was killed during the Boston Massacre and is widely considered to be the first casualty of the American Revolutionary War. The parade was led by Grand Marshal Major Milford Stanley, an African-American serviceman who survived 3 years of confinement in a prisoner of war camp. As the number of programs and events increased, public anticipation grew considerably in advance of the Founders Day Parade. And on the morning of May 18th, church bells thundered and factory whistles roared throughout the city at 8 a.m., marking the beginning of the day's festivities. All over town, Protestant and Catholic churches and Jewish synagogues held special services in observation of the 300th. Beginning at 12 noon, a 3-hour parade began its confident, unrelenting march down a flag and banner-draped Broad Street, in which 26 floats, 30 bands, and 5,000 participants proceeded past City Hall. 250,000 bystanders enthusiastically greeted the marchers and lined Broad Street, 6 and 7 people deep in some cases, from Lincoln Park all the way to Bridge Street. Led by Grand Marshal George Haney, members of the clergy followed along with cars carrying dignitaries including the mayors of both Newark and Newark-on-Trent in England. Among the marchers in the first division were the police and fire department bands, veterans of foreign wars, PSE&G, Newark Public Schools Marching Band, City of Newark Float, Antique Auto Club, and Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Company. Leading the second division were the Girl Scouts, followed by New Jersey Bell Telephone Company, United Community Corporation, Rutgers University, Arts High, the Irish Community Marching Unit, Essex County High School, the Ukrainian Community Marching Unit, and Howard Savings Institution. And lastly, the third division was led by the West Side High School Band, the Portuguese Community Float, the Polish Community Marching Unit, and St. Benedict's High School. Some attendees later packed Symphony Hall at 4 p.m. for a town meeting featuring musical performances by the combined choruses of several major corporations. Following a performance by soprano Veronica Tyler, several descendants of the city's founders were honored by the mayor, who also formally addressed the audience, and his speech was then followed by a presentation from William Kerr Bickerstaff, mayor of Newark-on-Trent. The audience also heard addresses from historian and historical society director John T. Cunningham and Chamber of Commerce president Milford Vieser. A lush reception and dinner of filet mignon at the Robert Treat Hotel concluded the day's festivities. In celebration of the tercentenary, the Newark Museum assembled a series of 8 exhibitions highlighting the city's history, culture, and social life, with a look into the next 10 years as envisioned by city planners. The exhibits opened on Founders Day and ran through the remainder of the year, filling every available gallery. The exhibit, Now and Then in Newark, traced the city's 300-year development, beginning with the region's plant and animal life in 1666. Visitors were shown how settlers would have originally made use of these resources. Lenni Lenape life was also depicted, as well as a recreation of the city's purchase price, approximately $750 worth of goods, including an axe, lead bars, guns, swords, wampum, coats, and beer. Photographs, models, and artifacts were then used to illustrate how certain neighborhoods changed and businesses developed over time. And for the record, I don't have no idea how much an anchor is worth, but. Backed by photographic murals of various cityscapes, the Newark scene before your time presented artifacts, historical images, advertisements, and other objects illustrating life from the 1800s through World War I. Sections of the exhibition floor explored the history of transportation as well as local businesses ranging from breweries, telecommunications, and agriculture. Important shipping industry is illustrated here, along with commerce and the original location of Ballantine Brewery. The exhibit 1800 House showcased family life and material culture by recreating a full-scale post-revolutionary New Jersey home in the museum's galleries. Period furnishings, architectural elements, and decorative art objects were installed throughout the entrance hall, parlor, and kitchen. Costumes and portraits of Newarkers featured 19th century clothing and artwork once worn or owned by local families. Furthermore, the exhibits John Jelliff, Newark cabinet maker, and Silver Newark surveyed the city's decorative art traditions as represented by its furniture making and silver industries. Urban Space and Transition was depicted in Adolph Conrad, an artist looks at Newark, whose paintings illustrated the brownstone and other structures that once defined the cityscape until they were razed in preparation of massive redevelopment projects. 38 works reminded visitors of the not too recent past and what had been sacrificed under the promise of growth and renewal. And finally, Newark 1976 offered an optimistic vision of the city 10 years into the future, as guided by the ongoing redevelopment efforts. Illustrated with architectural renderings and models, the exhibit included sections on commerce, industry, transportation, and housing. Pictured here is a proposed pedestrian mall along Halsey Street. And I've learned one way to measure the confidence of city planners is to study the level of detail given to the people in illustrations. In this 1947 rendering, you can see a child with a balloon on the right, as well as make out some of the men's and women's fashions of the day. Newark 1976 was actually an update of the 1957 Our Town exhibit, which drew over 78,000 visitors over its 4-month run. Like the Thornton Wilder play of the same name, Our Town stressed the timelessness of old Newark and the perseverance of community in the face of external forces. The exhibit traced Newark's growth from lowly settlement to a vibrant city, including its founding, governance, and natural resources. And in these displays, the long history of leather making, brewing, and manufacturing are shown alongside their modern equivalents. Visitors were reminded that the city's commercial and retail establishments, as well as its variety of housing stock, which included the suburban enclaves of Forest Hill, the bustling Ironbound district, and the modern high-rise apartments currently under construction. Finally, the religious traditions of the city's residents and cultural organizations, such as the library and museum, were covered in great detail. One of Our Town's goals was to reintroduce the city to former residents who now lived in the suburbs, as well as the increasing number of commuters with no family or historic ties to Newark. To the right, we can see Museum Director Catherine Coffey inspecting a billboard calling on families to visit Newark. A significant amount of space in the exhibit was dedicated to urban renewal efforts, and here it's important to remember that by the 1950s, Newark's landmass was a mere fraction of what it had been 150 years earlier. Had the city maintained its outlying suburbs, Newark today would include Nutley to the north, Maplewood and portions of Elizabeth to the south, and to the west, the Oranges, Bloomfield, Glen Ridge, Montclair, Verona, and the Caldwells, making it one of the most affluent cities in the Northeast. In reality, by mid-century, it had lost most of its outlying suburbs and faced a declining industrial base. The pressure to compete for the massive demand in housing following World War II extended to nearby communities such as Morristown, which aggressively pursued redevelopment of its own blighted and undeveloped areas. And yes, this is a tank participating in what the annual report calls, quote, the creation of better housing and better citizens. Of course, new homes in bucolic subdivisions were not open to all. The prevalence of redlining and neighborhood covenants restricted the sale of private property to certain racial and religious minorities, and this was common prior to the enactment of the Civil Rights Act. These covenants for Morris County prohibit, among other things, noxious or offensive businesses or occupancy by non-Christian or non-Caucasian persons. Therefore, the absence of new land for residential construction in Newark was seen as a major obstacle to revitalizing the city's economic vibrancy. One section of the exhibit encouraged visitors to imagine 8 locations throughout the city 10 years into the future, as illustrated by the Greater Newark Development Council. Housing developments included clearing 20 blocks of land between Branchbrook Park and the North Ward and Broad Street in the downtown area. Once the city declared these areas as blighted and obtained condemnation orders, the properties were then sold to private developers who transformed them into the 1,500-unit Columbus homes, as well as in the Central Ward, 1,200 units set aside for low-income and elderly residents. The recent $47 million upgrade to Port Newark paved the way for an industrial park with connecting rail and highway service to neighboring markets, as well as its own heliport. For the suburban commuter, a new east-west highway, a double-decker McCarter Highway, and a freeway loop around the city would speed drivers to new downtown parking garages. A cultural center bordering Washington Park promised to offer new facilities for Rutgers University and the Newark College of Engineering, or NJIT today, as well as an expanded museum complex and renovations to the public library. Business improvements included a pedestrian mall along Halsey Street, which we've heard about. Several major department stores, including Bamberger's, Haynes, and S. Klein, would anchor this facility that planners believed would offer middle-class shoppers an alternatives to suburban malls. The Halsey Street Mall featured off-street parking, moving walkways, an upper pedestrian concourse, and several new restaurants and cafes. Looking back to the 1966 feature exhibit, we can see these ambitions had become more modest in scope. The fact that the people in the artist's renderings have become amorphous blobs doesn't bode too well. By the time this exhibit was updated in '66 to show what planners envisioned for 1976, public housing had expanded considerably, as did the focus on commercial and industrial facilities. expectations in the 1950s that middle-class white-collar residents would prefer living in luxury towers was revised downward to focus on retirees and young couples who were not yet ready for their home in the suburbs. The print media during the 300th anniversary offered Newark a comprehensive look at the city's past, present, and its imagined future. One such publication was the Newark Evening News' special anniversary edition, which provided a detailed analysis of the economic and social issues at bay. In Thomas Hooper's front page article, the author rhetorically asked, quote, "Is Newark a tired old city, or does it contain within itself the seeds of a bright new future? For an authoritative answer, talk to the men who have a vital stake in Newark. Confidently, they'll speak of the city's gathering momentum, of its potential for growth unsurpassed in the nation, and of Newark as a model city of the future because of the way it will have solved some of its most vexatious problems." Hooper also noted that hard work lay ahead if residents were to solve the problems afflicting most metropolitan areas of the time, namely poverty, crime, and the middle-class exodus. But he asserted civic leaders were confident and willing to accept this challenge. Much of this optimism was directly tied to the massive housing reforms and the continued investment of several large industries that would make Newark a key central city in a metropolitan region stretching from Boston to Washington, D.C. Small and medium businesses also remained to show their confidence in the city's success. And here we can see one of several pages of ads placed by local firms with long ties to Newark in the anniversary edition. Furthermore, housing director Louis Danzig stated his opinion that by 1966, decentralization of industry and residency to the suburbs had ceased, and the city was ready to assume its new role as a cultural, educational, and commercial center. Mr. Danzig was partly correct if a bit premature, as we have recently seen a trend towards younger middle-class Americans choosing to move from the suburbs back to larger towns and cities. Edward Anderson's article, Anniversary Finds City in Transition, provided an account of solidarity among New Yorkers as they confronted race, prejudice, and poverty. Anderson asserted that, quote, "The city's people, joining in the struggle for a social order in which all can have equal opportunity, daily battle the evils of racial prejudice, discrimination, slums, and poverty." Of the city's 405,000 inhabitants, about 50,000 are estimated to be non-white. Most of these represent a new generation on the way up the social and economic ladder. In spite of the real challenges ahead, many believe that the massive redevelopment efforts would ultimately attract capital back into the city, and that by encouraging the tradition of hard work and civic pride, all of Newark's citizens would share in this economic boon. Of course, as we know from the events of 1967, things did not go according to plan. Bob Kervin's last book outlines in great detail how the riots exposed years of corruption within City Hall, the public's waning faith in institutions, the tragic breakdown in police and public relations, and the results of 20 years of middle-class divestment. Suburbanization was a force of nature that, like retreating tide, was impossible to stop. It took decades for city leaders to alter urban renewal plans to better anticipate the forces at bay. So once again, we're left with the question, why is it we choose to remember our history? Remembrance is not a choice. Remembrance is not a given, it's an active choice, and all great cities have taken extraordinary means to preserve their history. And so tonight we take a moment to remember the continuing history of Newark. Thank you.
Thanks. John Johnson, who will give us a glimpse of what was coming now on our 350th.
Good evening. Before I begin my comments, a brief description on what I'll present. I will give a general overview of the importance of remembrance and memory, and then I will explain the various programs and events that will take place next year by explaining it through the lens of Newark Celebration 350's mission and goals. But before I begin, I'd like to begin with a little meditation for the 350th. Oh, what a beautiful city, oh, what a beautiful city, oh, what a beautiful city, 12 gates to the city, hallelujah. 3 gates in the east, 3 gates in the west, 3 gates in the north, 3 gates in the south, making it 12 gates to the city, hallelujah. This very old song was fashioned within the crucible of the African American freedom struggle and slavery. And like many cultural artifacts that come from traditions in which people struggle to assert their humanity against persons and forces that would have it otherwise, it has a broader reading. It provides a way of contextualizing other freedom struggles, other ways of affirming humanity. It suggests a bolder vision for our fair city of Newark. More than an aspiration for some place up above our heads, it is a declaration, a pronouncement, a proclamation. It is an opportunity for Newarkers of all variations to make known to each other, surrounding communities, the nation, and the world, that Newark is a great and wonderful city. It is our meditation, oh, what a beautiful city. And how appropriate it is. If you look at the demographics and the shapes of the city, there are indeed 2 gates, at least in the east, being routes 1 and 9, and the Pulaski Skyway. 2 gates in the west being 280 and the Garden State Parkway, at least 2 gates in the north being Route 21 and Broadway, and another 2 gates at Interstate 78 and Route 22. Our beloved friend, Clement Alexander Price, was the catalyst for Newark Celebration 350. Clem was the first chair of NC 350, and Clem also invoked this song when talking about Newark. On one such occasion, the opening of Riverfront Park, Clem remarked, quote, "The Passaic River was the first gate to the place that ultimately became Newark." Clem loved using history and the arts and all their critical and creative rigor as a motive for gathering people together. Clem believed that civic engagement was the lifeblood of the city. This 350th anniversary is the opportunity to enliven civic culture, reintroduce ourselves to the world, and look at the challenges that face the city. Not in a fatalistic resignation, but as a way to chart paths towards civic understanding and renewal. Historian of memory David Blight observes, quote, "Memories and understandings of great events live in our consciousness like monuments in the mind," close quote. Scholar of public memory Erica Dawes also reminds us that monuments and memorials are very important, as the 2 previous panelists have shown. She says, "Marking social and political interests and claiming particular historical narratives, memorials can possess enormous power and influence," close quote. Newark Celebration 350, a year-long series of commemorative events, is vitally important to this city, in that it endeavors to rewrite the narrative of Newark. And so with that in mind, let's turn to the missions and goals of Newark Celebration 350. As you read, to commemorate the city of Newark's rich history, 350-year history, by celebrating the talents of its citizenry and its remarkable accomplishments. We begun this process on yesterday with our Family Fun Festival that was held in Military Park. That's you. How about that? That was not planned, to be sure. But as you can see, it was a joyous occasion. The weather held up for us. We had over 2,000 attendees, and the most notable thing from the day was the great amount of children that attended. In a time when people think that Newark is a very dangerous place and that it is not safe for children, children came out in great numbers. Parents brought their families out to celebrate Newark's birthday. And so this was the first salvo, or our first initiation event to celebrate the city's history. Our first goal for the celebration is to inculcate pride and identity through celebration of Newark's history in each ward and neighborhood. And we are on our way to fulfilling this goal. Newark Celebration 350 over the last week of September and the first week of October held meetings in all 5 wards. At these ward meetings, the goal was to empower residents to be event curators, to gather the creative input of residents, and to establish necessary relationships to ensure that 2016 will be a celebration that is truly representative of the city. There were suggestions for events that highlighted the cultural characteristics of each ward, but there were also threads that ran through each ward. And so in the East Ward, there was a desire to engage new immigrants. In the West Ward, there was a desire to highlight the uniqueness of communities like Roseville, Vailsburg, and the Ivy Hill section. In the Central Ward, one of the ideas that was brought to fore was a cookbook of recipes that represents Newarkers, and it also shows the origins of those recipes. In the South Ward, there was talk of looking at the history of Newark's water. And in the North Ward, there was an idea proposed to celebrate Valentine by having a Valentine's Day. Not Valentine's Day, but Valentine's Day. You got it. Our next goal is to focus and redirect the energy of Newark's residents to continued rebirth and regeneration. And then to discuss that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the events that will be taking place next year. Newark Citizen Historian Initiative is designed to engage Newarkers in historic preservation, and the Institute of Jazz Study will hold education sessions in community-based venues through its Newark Citizen Historian Initiative, which is a series of workshops that will encourage participants to identify and safeguard materials that document Newark's wide range of local and personal histories. The workshops, which will be reprised in Spanish as well as English, will include an introduction to preservation, genealogy and the care of textiles, and photographs. Preserving Your Digital Life will be held on April 26th at the Rutgers Dana Library. And so cultural artifacts like grandma's old quilt, looking at ways of preserving that, right? Another event will be, one of the major events that we're really strongly supporting is Newark Public Schools' commitment to promoting and engaging student involvement in the anniversary celebration, and then students learning the city's history. And teachers are making plans to create a curriculum on Newark's history for every student in every grade at every school. In addition, projects during the winter, spring, and summer breaks will afford students other opportunities connected with specific NC 350 events. The district will work with local history education experts and the NC 350 program committee to develop, refine, and finalize this curriculum for the celebration and beyond. Another event that speaks to focusing and directing the energy of Newark's residents to continued rebirth and regeneration is Newark Revisited, Making History Come Alive for Students. The Newark Trust for Education will launch a year-long set of initiatives and educational activities to unite parents, educators, and students in commemoration of Newark's cultural and social roots, culminating in May 2016, which is also the Founders Month. The Trust will offer small grants to Newark's district, charter, and independent schools to implement educational activities. Another important event will be Senior Voices of Newark. And over the course of 2016, the Playwrights Theater will present writings of senior citizens from all 5 wards, performed with professional actors from Newark at select senior centers. These writings feature accounts of Newark's past, told by people who experienced life in Newark firsthand. One of the proposed ideas that came out of all of the wards was creating an oral history archive. And these are just some of the events that will make use of those oral history archives. Third goal of Newark Celebration 350 is to use the historical evolution of neighborhoods in the context of immigration, both old and new, to demonstrate how Newark has become one city with many voices. At the Newark Public Library, the Kruger Scott Oral History Collection, consisting of interviews with more than 100 African-American Newark residents who migrated from the South between 1910 and 1970, will be the subject of an exhibition at the Newark Public Library during the annual Black History Month celebration. In the North Ward, the Three Kings celebration marks the day the Magi brought gifts to the child Jesus. This centuries-old tradition is told through song and storytelling. What makes this particular Three Kings celebration different is that it will show how different cultures around the world celebrate this tradition. In March of 2016, the Newark St. Patrick's Day Parade is New Jersey's oldest St. Patrick's Day Parade, and it will mark its 9th decade of celebration. In March as well, Linda Forgosh, who is here in the audience, is curator and outreach director at the Jewish Historical Society, will discuss the history of the Weequahic section, which was home to over 35,000 Jewish residents from the 1930s to the 1960s. And last, under this goal, is the 17th Annual International Food and Musical Festival, which will be held in Ivy Hill. What is unique about this particular festival is interesting is that one of the best kept secrets about the West Ward, and in particular Ivy Hill, is the rich diversity of immigrants that live there now. And all of those cultures will be represented at that festival. Goal number 4 is to study and document the periods of conflict and derive lessons for growth and reconciliation to enable future generations to avoid the mistakes of the past. The annual Marion Thompson Wright Lecture will focus with increased national attention on issues of policing and incarceration. This year's Marion Thompson Wright Lecture will host a discussion on the historical developments that have brought us to recent events in Ferguson, Baltimore, and many other American towns. Featured on that panel or that list of discussers will be Ruth Wilson Gilmore from the CUNY Graduate Center, Khalil Gibran Muhammad from the Schomburg Center, and Heather Ann Thompson from the University of Michigan. And in the afternoon, there will be a panel composed of Junius Williams, Larry Ham, Deborah Jacobs, and Newark Mayor Ras Baraka, who will explore the history of police reform in Newark. The next event that will fall under that particular goal is the Crisis of Opportunity and Hope, Race in the 21st Century. The New Jersey Institute of Social Justice and NJPAC will host a three-part series of dynamic conversations with leading voices on the significant challenges facing people of color, particularly in urban communities and in looking at the way forward to address these challenges. These conversations will address areas of political participation and empowerment, economic mobility, and racial bias in the criminal justice system. The next program that will also fall under that goal is Progressives Reformers on Newark Takes the Lead. This is a Newark History Society event and is actually a reflective look on the ways in which the city responded to a number of challenges. This panel discussion reveals why Newark was at its most aspirational at the turn of the 20th century and how the city came together to tackle educational reform, take on key infrastructure projects, and create new cultural institutions. The fifth goal is to identify and celebrate the great musical, artistic, and intellectual contributions Newark has bestowed upon its people in town, throughout the nation, and around the world. The Power of Words of Mary Baraka is led by the students at the Paulo Freire Charter School in conjunction with the Tribeca Film Institute. And they will film a short documentary to interpret the poetic words of the late Mary Baraka. The film will screen at the Tribeca Film Festival in May. And students and residents of Newark may also see the film at a screening at the Cityplex 12 here in the city. La Asociación de Barranquereños, sorry if I butchered that, of New Jersey, they will host their annual Arts and Music Fair, which will showcase Newark's Latino artists at the Elwood Park in the North Ward. And they will feature local artists' work in art, music, poetry, theater, pottery, sculpture, dance, and paper mache. The next event under that particular goal will be the 15th annual Open Door Citywide Festival, which we just had this past weekend. And the Citywide Arts Tour celebrates Newark's unique and diverse contributions to American arts and culture. I recommend that if you have your Palm Pilots, if people still use them, or your calendars, you jot some of these things down. The next event under that particular goal will be the Newark Boys Chorus Annual Spring Concert. Known as Newark's musical ambassadors, the Boys Chorus will have their spring concert, and it will include a specially arranged medley of songs featuring the music of some of Newark's art luminaries. And this will also celebrate the 350th anniversary. Goal 6, to focus the attention of the city and the nation on the rich history of Newark, New Jersey as a way to engage people of all ages who live, work, and play in the city in its continued rebirth and revitalization. The first event that will actually kick this off will be a holiday tour led by the Newark Preservation and Historic Landmarks Committee, which will visit the churches along Broad Street, and they will include our First Presbyterian Church on Broad, Trinity Cathedral, as well as Petty Baptist Memorial. Newark Stories by WBGO will speak to the city's past, present, and future. And using a multimedia oral history project, they will capture everyday Newarkers' voices and memories, many called from other 350 partners. Ahead of the curve, the Newark Museum 1909 through 2016 will be an exhibition at the Newark Museum that focuses on the ways in which the museum which was founded in 1909, created the model for today's museums. And important objects from the founding collections will highlight the music's seminal role in establishing a place for visual learning in the city of Newark prior to World War I. And an interactive program or event will be the Faces of Newark. If you go onto Facebook and search Faces of Newark, this initiative is led by Glassroots, and you'll be able to take a picture and post it, and it will be displayed on a permanent monument, and it would also be on a online mosaic. Goal number 7 is to enable the history of Newark to serve as a beacon of hope and a blueprint for change for cities similarly situated all over the nation. One of the important points that I think came out of some of the previous discussions were, how does one deal with the complicated history of the city? And oftentimes people go back to 1967 as the origins of it, but truth be told, the complexities of the city go way back, and these events will speak to some of those things. The 1967 rebellion, power politics before and after, will be presented by the Abbott Leadership Institute, and it will examine the evolution of empowerment for Black people, culminating with the election of Mayor Ken Gibson in 1970. This event will be timed to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Black Power and explore with national and local leaders from that era what it meant to be in Newark in the 1960s and 1970s. The South Ward Climate Justice Tour will feature a climate justice tour on the Bus for Progress, with designated stops in the South Ward and other Newark neighborhoods. The tour will visit the Clean Water Fund's community-driven projects, such as a cool roof, solar installations, community rain gardens, green infrastructure, and more. Discussion will focus on the accomplishments of residents, businesses, and the city to green their neighborhoods and make them more climate resilient, livable, and healthy for all. And then the last featured event is the healthcare in Newark, the moving paradigm from historical relevance to national prominence. And this particular panel will discuss how the shift in healthcare paradigm is positioning Newark to become a national model for community health and wellness, research and service delivery, and will also explore how Newark can become an incubator for medical firsts. Finally, for those that are interested in participating and submitting events to Newark Celebration 350, I invite you to please copy down that URL. If you're interested in submitting, please go to that link where you can enter the information in an online form. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we get the house lights up somewhat so we can see the audience? And as we do that, let me, in as much as Tim said I was there in 1966, and I was, let me sort of supplement some of the things that Jeff mentioned when he talked about celebrations in '66. From what you heard from him, and perhaps there are many here who were there, that celebration was corporate driven. It was the business community was involved from start to finish. And they assigned an executive who happened to be from the telephone company to be the John Johnson of the 300th celebration. His name was Paul, perhaps better known to some of you as Pete Lozer. He is still living. He is about 90 years old, and we are good friends from my career in the telephone company. And as we were planning this program, I called him and told him we were doing this, invited him, but he can't travel at this time. And I did ask him, what were your fondest memories of the 300th? And he mentioned a couple of the things that you saw depicted by Jeff, and that was the parade, for one, and the banquet was the other. And if you ask me, I would say that too, plus a couple of other things. And the significant thing about the parade is the fact that it was on a weekday and in the middle of the day. So they literally closed down downtown Newark. Remember this, I mentioned this is business driven. So that shows you part of the commitment to that celebration. And I personally recall the idea of so many events happening all over the city of Newark, day and night. You know, today people think and talk about Newark is unsafe and whatever, but it certainly and clearly did not exist back in that time to the degree, obviously, that what it is today. I do remember that the Boy Scouts, we had a significant Boy Scout program in Newark, the Robert Tree Council, and they had a Boy Scout jamboree that covered all of Washington Park, where the Scouts camped out overnight over a weekend with no problem. And then finally, I certainly remember in my conversations with Clem Price and certainly my dear friend Bob Curvin that 1966 was clearly, in terms of the 20th century, the zenith of Newark. Because just think what happened 1 year later. All right, let's open up for questions and brief ones and brief comments. There are ushers with microphones. Raise your hand and they will get a mic to you.
Hi, I have a quick question just about all the events that Dr. Johnson, correct, had illuminated for us. Is there a website that we can go to get all that?
nc350.org.
Okay, just that. Thank you.
Someone else?
Yeah, I forget your name again.
John Johnson.
Johnson? Dr. Johnson, I have a question. The 27th, when you said you're going to visit the churches, are you going to visit the synagogue in Newark, Ava Shalom on Broadway or anything like that?
To clarify, the event is being organized by the Preservation Society, and so they're the ones that are leading it, and it's along the it's a holiday tour,
Right.
Christmas holidays of the churches along Broad. So in their schedule, I don't believe they have the synagogue listed.
All right. And one other question. Did you know there's some old synagogues? Are they going to give that a tour? The one was B'nai Abraham. Martin Luther King went to visit that synagogue. He was good friends with Rabbi Prince. Mm-hmm. And the other one is still on 16th Avenue, and it has a sign there on 16th Avenue. I wonder if they can give tours of those synagogues, you know.
Well, one of the proposals that we've received a number of submissions since our first review. One of the submissions was a screening of the film on Rabbi Prince at B'nai Abraham, and so there's a possibility of having the community come to visit for that. What I would encourage again folks to do is that we are really an umbrella group that wants to support initiatives that celebrate the city's history. And so if you have proposals, if you have ideas of doing a tour of the historic synagogues, whether it's Oher Shalom on Prince Street, whether it's what is now New Hope, Hopewell on King Boulevard of B'nai Abraham, we can organize that, and please email me. We can have a conversation to talk about those possibilities.
Over here.
Hi. This is exciting, the 350th anniversary, and I'm really looking forward to it as I've been a resident in Newark since 1975. One thing about the 1916 one, it really left benefits for future generations in the form of sculptures and other things as well. I'm wondering if there's any way we could look ahead to the 358th anniversary or something like that, where we could leave it for Newark a gift for future generations, perhaps in the form of one thing which could be a new riverfront park with public sculpture, and also bringing everyone together, including corporate people that had through the decades made a lot of wealth here in Newark. Invite them back, give a little bit of money back, and give something as a gift to future generations as well. So it's something like that would need a lot of planning and a lot of money. And anyway, that's just one thought I had about it.
If you have any hint on the source of the funds, I'm sure John will.
Please.
Tim?
Marty, could you comment a little bit more about the involvement of the German community in Newark in the planning of 1916? The German industrialists had been taken such a prominent role in building the wealth of Newark and making it the metropolis that it was aiming to be. Was it only World War I that led them not to take a more prominent role in the depiction of Newark's history, or was there something else going on?
I think the general idea of the national presentations was to present a non-threatening image of group identity. So the Germans aren't the only ones who did not present something controversial. The Irish, for example, if we just make up things that we think that these groups could have presented, the Irish at this point could have referred to the Easter Rising that just took place in Dublin a few weeks earlier. But they didn't. They talked about St. Patrick. Germans did the same sort of thing, and so did most of the other groups. I do think that the war is a significant reason for why the Germans had to be careful. But the Irish had to be careful for the same reason too. They were suspect because of the war as well. But the idea that the last movement of the pageant wanted to portray, without saying so, was that these groups were coming together peacefully. So they edited out things that could have been controversial or threatening.
All right, we take one more.
This question is for Marty.
Yes.
I noticed that you didn't mention Military Park, where that used to be where soldiers put up tents and all that kind of stuff back in the day, wasn't it?
Yes, farther back. Military Park was essentially
further back from
revolutionary.
1916?
the parade ground. Events happened at Military Park as well in 1916. And one of the most interesting connections with Military Park, the sculptor who I mentioned, Gutzon Borglum, did additional sculptures. In addition to the Lincoln and the Indian and Puritan on Washington Street, he did another one on Saybrook Place, not far from where we are now, which was lost and recently rediscovered. But he went on and continued his relationship with Newark and did the Wars of America Memorial in Military Park, which is one that he's well known for nationally. And then, of course, he goes on to do Mount Rushmore after that. So Military Park is very important, yes.
Okay, unless there's a burning question or comment. There's, oh,
Cigarello. 1966, I was at 20.
Hold on.
Microphone.
Microphone.
But I would say if I could conjure the Puritans, we have lost our way. I don't need that.
yes, you do. Use it.
Okay,
Use
thank
it.
you. We have lost our way because we have a wonderful street called Broad Street, but our neighborhoods are so needing, and as we know as fellow historians, that it's because so much of our business, because of Washington, D.C., went not only south, but then to Mexico and China for that 11 cents an hour and a bowl of rice. 1966, I never attended the parade. My joy was going to the downtown theaters, seeing our lively commerce in 1966. I ask every one of you, please help save the Paramount. The last one with its great marquee out there saying proudly, Newark Paramount. But save our awards too. Ask Prudential to step up to the plate. Ask Public Service to step up to the plate. In 1875, we know that John Dryden came down with only pennies in his pocket, and Newark gave him so much that when he dies, we have Morgan going to his site in Mount Pleasant, walking with others in their monkey suits to honor John Dryden. I don't think John Dryden, okay, the question is this: how can we incorporate the great corporations to make this truly a great anniversary by making sure that every man, woman, and child in Newark has a great opportunity, not only for education, but for jobs at decent wages? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and I'm sure a lot of what you heard John talk about, what's planned for 2016, incorporates that concept and what you are suggesting. But thanks for you. But thank all of you, too, for being a part of this night. As I started out, I said we are here to look at Newark celebrations, past and the future. And I think these three kind gentlemen have achieved that, and thank you very much. We remind you that there is literature out in the lobby here on future programs. those specifically related to 350th that the Newark History Society will be doing in conjunction with NJPAC and others. And we, of course, always invite you to be a part of everything that we do, and we thank you so much for being here. So again, thanks to the panel, thanks to you. Safe trip home.